So I was reading into this a little bit more, and I'm trying to be very careful when it comes to the Trump shooting and the attempted assassination on Trump, right? Because there's been a heavy censorship on some of the Trump stuff that's been going on. But something that I haven't seen be reported on YouTube that I definitely think needs to be, there's some attention needs to be brought to this. Secret Service officers were aware of Thomas Crooks like 90 minutes before the shooting. Now, I initially thought I said this has to be fake news. Fake news. Well, it's not. The New York Times also got a hold of some text messages that indicate this. So they got messages that were released to them specifically about this. And they say nearly 100 minutes before former President Donald Trump took the stage in Butler, Pennsylvania, a local counter sniper who was part of the broader security details let his colleagues know his shift was ending. "Guys, I'm out. Be safe," he texted a group of colleagues at about 4:19 p.m. on July 13th. He exited the second floor of a warehouse that overlooked the campaign rally site, leaving two other counter snipers behind. Outside, the officers noticed a young man with the long, stringy hair sitting on a picnic table near the warehouse. So at about 4:26 p.m., he texted his colleagues about the man, who was outside the fence area of Butler Fair Showgrounds, where Mr. Trump was to appear. He said that the person would have seen him come out with his rifle and knows you guys are up there. The counter sniper who sent the text messages confirmed to the New York Times that the individual he saw was later identified as the gunman. This is one of the messages. "Someone followed our lead and snuck in and parked by our cars. Just so you know. I'm just letting you know because you see me go out with my rifle and put it in my car so he knows you guys are up there. He's sitting to the direct right on a picnic table about 50 yards from the exit." A response, a thumb emoji. Roger that. The counter sniper with local law enforcement first noticed Tom Crooks nearly 100 minutes before the shooting and texted two colleagues about his presence. "I'm really tired about how information is being delivered to us because I swear that before this article, it was something else. Like, I don't know about you guys, but this is infuriating. And we should all be upset about this." So these messages were given exclusively to the New York Times. About by 5:10 p.m., the young man was no longer on the picnic table. He was right below the counter snipers who were upstairs in the warehouse owned by the AGR International. One of the counter snipers took pictures of him, according to law enforcement after action report, which along with the text from the Beaver County Emergency Service Unit was provided to the Times by the office of Senator Charles E. Grassley, Republican of Iowa. The text messages were independently verified by the Times. At 5:38 p.m., the photos were shared in a group chat, and another text went out among the officers saying they should inform the Secret Service. It says, "Kid learning around," I think they meant to say kid leaning around the building we are in. That might have been a typo of that text message. Kid learning around the building we are in. AGR, I believe it is. I did see him with the range finder looking towards the stage. FYI, if you want to notify SS snipers to look out, I lost sight of him. And these are all visible. Okay? Call it into command and have uniform check it out. By 6:11 p.m., the kid would be dead on the roof of a warehouse connected to the one the counter snipers were stationed in after having been shot by the Secret Service for trying to kill a former president. And look at this picture. Taken together, the text messages provided the most detailed picture yet of the hours before the assassination attempt, they revealed that the gunman, later identified as Thomas Crooks, 20, okay, aroused police suspicion more than 90 minutes before the shooting rather than about 60, as has been previously discussed in congressional hearings. So, going back to those congressional hearings, if you guys have been following this, who said it was 60? The would-be assassin was often one step ahead of security forces, and in particular the Secret Services. So Thomas scoped out the rally site a day before the Secret Services did. He used a drone to survey the site while the Secret Service did not seek permission to use one for the rally. He researched how far Lee Harvey Oswald was from John F. Kennedy when he fatally shot the president in 1963. The answer was about 265 feet. He managed to climb onto the roof that was about 400 feet from Mr. Trump at its closest point. The Secret Service left that room unmanned. And while the counter snipers were assigned to surveil the rally, Mr. Crooks was also in a position to watch them. Even after the episode ended, the police seemed confused about what Mr. Crooks had done and how. So on TV, they're saying Trump was shot at and he got hit. But I don't believe that, one local police officer said to another 17 minutes after the shooting in a conversation captured on a body-worn camera. As the officers in the video walked towards the warehouse on which Mr. Crooks' lifeless body laid, one can be heard saying, "I'm trying to figure out how this guy got here." Investigators are still trying to determine Mr. Crooks' motivations and his actions in the days before the rally, in part what they have found on his personal devices. But the texts and footage, combined with the interviews by the Times and public testimony by the investigators, have filled in some of the answers. Mr. Crooks had already had an AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle he bought to the rally. He purchased it on October from his father, who had acquired it legally in 2013. He began to receive packages at his house in Pittsburgh's suburbs, including a fertilizer pellets and radio devices. He would later use some of this material to build bombs, two of which were found in his vehicle after the shooting and another in his home. Mr. Crooks had started searching online for information on famous people, including the FBI director, the Attorney General, President Biden, Mr. Trump. He also looked up major depressive disorder. On July 3rd, Mr. Trump's campaign announced that the rally in Butler for 10 days later, and Mr. Crooks narrowed his focus to the former president and to past assassinations. On July 6, Mr. Crooks typed in a phrase. He did a Google search. The next day, Mr. Crooks drove to the farm showgrounds, about an hour from his home. He spent 20 minutes there, investigators said. He also registered to attend the rally. Secret Service agents would not hold their first walkthrough until the following day, July 8th, joined by law enforcement officials from several local and state agencies. It was then that the Secret Service decided to exclude the entire warehouse complex owned by AGR, including building number 6, which Mr. Crooks would later use from his inner security perimeter. This meant that on the day of the rally, Mr. Crooks was able to approach the building without passing through security screening. There's still confusion about which agency was supposed to oversee the route. We know now that Kimberly Cheadle, then the director of the Secret Service, had told the House committee on Monday that she did not know whose job it was, and she resigned the next day, right? After their walkthrough, the Secret Service had asked local agencies to provide more help. Text messages showed that Beaver County struggled to find enough volunteers to cover the 12-hour shift. A leader says that one of the available snipers could arrive at about 8 a.m. but would need to leave by 4 p.m. That's work, another leader responded to the text. On July 11th, Secret Service returned to the site for a final walkthrough with its local partners. The next day, Crooks made his own final preparations. He went to a shooting range at about 2:30 to practice with his AR-15 style rifle. On Saturday morning, July 13th, the timeline of security personnel and the would-be assassin. Officers from several local law enforcement agencies were scheduled for a briefing at 9 a.m. The after-action report indicates that the Secret Service was not in attendance. At the same time, Mr. Crooks went to a Home Depot and purchased a ladder. A bloody receipt was found in the shooter's pocket after he was killed, showed that he bought it around 9:30 a.m. Then Crooks drove to the rally site, reaching the showgrounds at about 10 a.m. and staying about 70 minutes, even as local counter snipers were arriving. When Crooks left, he drove to his hometown and bought 50 rounds of ammunition. He then returned to Butler, arriving at the farm showgrounds in his Hyundai Sonata at about 3:35 p.m. According to geolocation information from his cell phone, at about 15 minutes later, he flew his drone over the site for 11 minutes, including in a path about 200 yards from Mr. Trump's podium. He finished using his drone and sat in the picnic table where the counter sniper spotted him. Mr. Crooks walked to his car, left the drone inside, and was soon hanging around the warehouse complex. Unlike the other visitors, he was not trying to enter the rally through the security checkpoints, a fact that attracted the attention of local counter snipers inside the rally. One of them took photos of him at about 5:14 p.m. Harris, the Pennsylvania State Police Commissioner, testified in a congressional hearing on Tuesday that officers were busy that day responding to more than 100 heat-related emergencies. There was also other suspicious people whom security officials were trying to assess at the rally, which is not unusual for such events, says Colonel Paris. Then Mr. Crooks did something that alarmed the police. They saw him using the range finder. So then a Beaver County counter sniper shared 2 photos of Mr. Crooks with his colleagues at about 5:38 p.m., which were then relayed to the Secret Service through a series of steps in the command center. One of the 2 remaining counter snipers ran out of the building, attempting to keep an eye on Crooks until the other law enforcement arrived. This is according to a statement by the district attorney who supervised some of the law enforcement unit. But Mr. Crooks ran off, taking a backpack with him. Okay. When the officers were unable to find Mr. Crooks, he returned to his post. 4 of the Butler Township officers who had been directing traffic joined the manhunt. At about 6 p.m., one of the officers in the group text guessed that Mr. Crooks was moving towards the back of the complex of the AGR building, away from the event. Instead, Mr. Crooks clambered onto the low-slung building in the complex closest to the stage. So Trump takes the podium at about 6:03 p.m. into a crowd. 6 minutes later, the rally attendees began pointing to someone on the roof of the warehouse. Either through luck or preparation, Mr. Crooks had found a place on the roof that would let him see Mr. Trump clearly, but also seemed to keep him somewhat hidden from the Secret Service counter snipers. Though Mr. Crooks did not bring his newly purchased ladder, he managed to climb onto the roof and walk across a complex of interconnected roofs. Butler Township officer had no ladder themselves, so one officer boosted up another, grabbed the roof, and pulled himself up to find Mr. Crooks pointing a gun at him. With no hands left to pull his own gun, the officer dropped. At about 6 p.m., Crooks let loose his first round. In the end, Mr. Trump was spared not by the vast law enforcement protecting him, but by chance. He turned his head, and Mr. Crooks' first bullet whizzed by close enough to gaze his ear. The former president dived to the ground. Mr. Crooks set off another round. The second Secret Service snipers team fired back and killed Crooks. The body cam footage shows officers climbing a ladder to find Crooks laying dead on the roof. One of the men said, "Looks like, at least 8. One of them says counting shells casing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. At least 8. I'm just skimming a little bit of what the New York Times article said. So more details are coming out, and I want to know what you guys think in the comments. This was just a brief review of that article. I think it's important to put out the correct and accurate information. It wasn't 60 minutes. It was 100 based on what the article is saying that they knew. There's text messages that shows communication between them. It's important to share this information. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'll see you guys on the next one. Rabbits out. Bye, guys.